be hear from Gideon's partner, Bob Odell, and he'll be speaking to us on the New Testament challenge to stand with Israel. Now, Bob is my kind of guy. He's an ex-computer scientist. Well, maybe you're never really an ex-computer scientist. Of course, he was a hardware guy, and I was a software guy. But let me tell you just a little bit about him. His undergrad degree was from the University of Southern Florida, and his master's, if I got this right, is from UT, University of Texas in Austin. In the 90s, he worked at Motorola, where his work with integrated chips put him in contact with engineers from Israel. He left Motorola to start a highly successful high-tech company. Now he is an entrepreneur and founder of RootSource with Gideon Ariel. So please welcome Bob Odell.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate that. I feel for all of you having to be on the receiving end of a streaming presentation like this, but I have good news for you. I'm gonna flip off of my face very quickly and go to the slides, because I think my slides are going to be a lot more interesting than looking at me. So one thing I'll say about Gideon, I wasn't able to join in on his presentation due to some technical difficulties, but I just wanted to say about Gideon, I've been working with him almost daily for over 3 years. One thing I'll say about Gideon, and in that time, he has never disrespected me for my belief in Jesus as the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. So, and I really do have a wonderful friendship with him. Let me flip to my slides here. Let's see if I can share screen. And, okay, hopefully you can see this part one, part two. So I'm going to attempt to give two shorter presentations within this next time slot. And first on why Israel, and second, we'll call it the flavor of replacement. So first, I believe Gideon may have mentioned some of our website and so forth, but if he has not, or just once again, the website root-source.com/theway has some of the special offers and things that we're offering for this particular, I think over the next 24 hours is what I believe Gideon said he was going to do. And there's 2 free things you can get from RootSource. I know not everyone is in a position to subscribe to some of the things that we're doing, but we offer 2 free things. First, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel and the RootSource YouTube channel. And secondly, on this page or on any page on rootsource.com, you can find a place to sign up for the free newsletter, which comes out once a week and is a collection of a number of things that I think you'll find interesting. All right, well, let me move on to my presentation. So this particular presentation that we're going to go through first is an attempt to try to take a huge topic and boil it down to just under 15 minutes. This is the presentation that I wish I had first seen when I started investigating Israel. And we're going to publish a video on this presentation on Monday. So if you subscribe to the YouTube channel right away, you'll definitely get a copy of this first presentation. So let me get into this. Why Israel? Why is Israel embroiled in world conflict? So if you're a visual person like I am, you'd like to know where things are. And where is Israel on this map? In that red circle. And that red circle happens to be at the intersection of 3 major continents. And if you really think about it, that red circle is at the center of the world. And as we zoom in here, we see that Israel is part of the Middle East as well. The land in which Israel now resides has had many different names over the years. First, it was named Canaan. Then, when the Israelites took possession of the land thousands of years ago, it became known as Israel. After the Romans conquered it in 135, they renamed it Palestine. But the name that stayed with that land in the years that would follow would be the Holy Land. And then since 1948, it has been known once again as Israel. Now, where in this picture is Jerusalem? Well, Jerusalem is at the center of Israel. And if Israel is at the center of the world, then Jerusalem is also at the center of the world. But don't take my word for it, because God says it's true. Thus says the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. I have set her at the center of the nations, with lands around her. In another place, the word navel is used. The navel is at the center of gravity of the human body. And pray tell, what is at the center of Jerusalem? The Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount has significance for the three major religions of the world. First in history, about 4,000 years ago, with the purchase by King David from the Jebusites, the construction of the temple and the construction of the temple, its importance was established within the Jewish tradition. Next, about 2,000 years ago, with its centrality in Jesus's life and his death and resurrection, its importance in the Christian tradition was established. Finally, with the building of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 637 AD, it has been part of the Muslim traditions as well. But now we come to the issue of world conflict, because there is conflict at multiple levels about Israel and its borders, and does it have a right to exist? There's conflict about Jerusalem. Is it recognized as the capital of Israel or not? And there's conflict about the Temple Mount. Was it really Jewish? Who owns it? Who is allowed to pray there? And there are many other issues involved. The Palestinian issue, human rights complaints, settlements, walls between Palestinians and Jews, rockets being fired, terrorism, human shields. Now, there are many positive factors as well. Israel is a democracy. It has a strong court system where you can get a fair trial. It has been known for great technology and for its disaster recovery work in places like Nepal and Haiti and more. But what is all this big mess about? In my opinion, all the conflict boils down to one issue. One simple question. Does God have the right to choose a certain family and give them a key piece of land forever? We're going to look at each of these 5 items in sequence. First, let's look at the issue of God. Now, I expect that most people who are listening to this do believe in God, but have you ever considered the idea that God uses Israel as a way to show that he exists to the whole world? Did you know that no people in the history of the world has gone into exile and then come back to remake their own country? And the Jewish people did this not just once in their history, but twice. The first time after 70 years in Babylonia, and the second time after 1,878 years of dispersion among the nations. And the Bible even predicts this. In Isaiah 66:8, God says, "Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Can a land be born in one day?" And this happened on November 29th, 1947, when the United Nations voted to establish a Jewish homeland. The Jewish homeland was born on that day by a full vote of the UN. It was completely legal. Isaiah continues, can a nation be brought forth all at once? That happened too on May 14th, 1948, when this new Jewish homeland began to govern itself and issued its own name. They called themselves Israel. The verse in Isaiah concludes, "And as soon as Zion travailed, she also brought forth her sons." That Zion travailing, that sounds a lot like the Holocaust, doesn't it? Well, that was 1948. But what about the future? Well, God says that it will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. What this is saying is that whether you believe in God or not, this nation is not going away. This land is not going away, and this city is not going away. It will continue to be the source of world conflict until all things are brought to completion. But why the conflict? Well, let's move to the next item. Does God have the right to choose a certain family and give them a key piece of land forever? Is it fair? Is God fair to choose one particular family? It's a reasonable question. I would point out that to be chosen does not make you better, certainly not automatically. And it certainly doesn't make your life easier. You could ask the Jews about that. But for those of us who are not Jews, there is a sweetener. Because God says to Abraham, "And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse." God understands that it's not easy to deal with the fact that he has chosen a certain family, and not yours or mine. But he says, for those of you that have not been chosen, I'm going to bless you if you will bless them. And conversely, the one who curses you, I will curse. In other words, God will make it clear what his choice is, and he will guide us to try to make the right decision by the blessing and the curses. Item number 3. Does God have the right to choose a certain family? I think this topic is epitomized no better than with the person who tried to destroy more Jews than any other person in history, Adolf Hitler. Hitler hated the Jews because of something he saw in them, that he saw as being diametrically opposed to his own worldview, in which the strong rule over the weak. Hitler said that the 10 Commandments have lost their validity. Conscience, he said, was a Jewish invention. Hitler wanted to kill every Jew because of the Jewish spirit within them. If one little Jewish boy survives without any Jewish education, with no Jewish synagogue and no Hebrew school, it's in his soul, said Hitler. It has been there from the beginning, and there is no Jew, not a single one, that does not personify it, he said. Now, what was that corrupting force on the world of the Jewish spirit, in his opinion? The Jewish belief that all people are equal under God. And secondly, the belief that people ought to live freely as much as possible. Yes, abiding within certain commandments, but otherwise living free. Hitler hated equality and freedom. He wanted to rule. He wanted to control. Now, what about the land? Israel, as a Jewish homeland, is the center of the Arab conflict today, because the Arab leaders, not all the Arab people, but the Arab leaders, will not recognize a Jewish state of any kind and of any size in the Middle East. Golda Meir, one of the early prime ministers of Israel, once said, "We will never have peace until the Arabs love their children more than they hate us." Not only are Arab children taught that Jews have come into their homeland and stolen their land, but they are taught that to be a hero means to kill at least one Jew any Jew before you die. Arabs do not recognize a Jewish state of any size. If Hitler hated the Jews as a family, then the Arab conflict extends to opposing the family on the land. Finally, does God have the right to choose a certain family and give them a key piece of land forever? This is where we Christians often fall, because many Christians believe that the Jews lost their inheritance when they denied Jesus as the Messiah, and that the promises of Israel are now owned by the church. Now, let me say a few things about that. First, the New Testament tells us that Jesus coming to die was God's idea and plan from the beginning, that the decision was already made before the foundation of the world. Jesus also said, "No man takes my life from me. I give it willingly." But what about this idea that the Jews lost their inheritance when they rejected Christ? It comes back to the nature of God. Do you believe that God will stand by his promises when he says in Genesis 17, "I will give you and your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God"? The main question here is the nature of God. Will he stand by his promise and do what he's promised to do? And we as Christians, how should we think of ourselves? The New Testament says that Christians are the wild olive branches that are grafted into the rich root of the Jewish olive tree. So as Christians, we are part of God's inheritance, but not naturally. We are grafted in. That which is grafted in does not abolish and replace that which is already there. It just becomes part of what is already there. We Christians are the wild branches. So why Israel? Why is Israel embroiled in world conflict? To showcase the nature of God to the world, to show what God cares about. When we look at Israel, we can see that God exists, that God is a God of people and family, that God sees certain land as strategically placed, and we must allow him to take and use a small part of the world at the very center of the world for his own purposes. And finally, God never breaks his promises. To me, all this boils down to one simple word: love. God is love. We started by asking why Israel is embroiled in world conflict, and we end in love. Why Israel? Because God needed a family and a bit of land to showcase his love to the world forever. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed part one of this presentation. And like I said, if you could use that or think it might be helpful to other people, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel within the next 24 hours, and you'll get that for sure. Also, you'll get it if you get on the newsletter at that link down at the bottom of the screen. So may I do a quick, let me stop sharing here, see if I can come back and take a, okay, there we go. All right, how's everybody doing? Wave your hand if you were able to hear that, and okay, great. Now I know how much delay there is. All right. So yeah, you can turn to a person next to you and tell them that presentation was for you. And then if you're really brave, you can turn to the same person and tell them the next presentation is for me. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back and we're going to continue now. Let's see. All right, so part 2 is called the flavor of replacement. So let me jump right into this. In the last presentation, you may have noticed we touched on replacement theology. So what is replacement theology? First, we have to define what is the Abrahamic covenant. And this we also covered by quoting Genesis 17. I will give to you and your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So replacement theology is simply a belief that the Abrahamic covenant has either been A, abolished, or B, reconstructed. For those that hold to replacement theology, it is more common to believe that the covenant has been reconstructed, as in that the promises to Israel have been taken by the church. And essentially, where replacement theology leads to is the conclusion that the physical land of Israel today and the modern Jewish state are a coincidence and not an act of God. Okay, that is the destination of replacement theology today. And as we mentioned in the last presentation, you may have caught, there's two main problems with replacement theology. One is that it makes God out to be a liar. And second, at least that's the way I see it, and many people do. And secondly, that it describes a God that might also break promises to us as well. It basically creates a much more unsettled world, if you will. Okay, so that's the basic definition of replacement theology. Now, in this presentation going forward, whenever you see something in green shading, this is my opinion, okay? So just keep that as a key. Every other color is just for effect, but anything that's green, I'm stating my opinion so that you will know, you will have an ability to identify that. So over the years, I've noticed the term replacement theology it's rarely ever known by that name by those who espouse it. Most people wouldn't say that they believe in replacement theology. They just believe what they believe, and it just happens to conform to that. And for those of us who love Israel, it's so easy for us to think in these terms, that replacement theology is that bad thing that those other people do, but not me. And therefore, what I have is right theology, therefore, because it's not replacing. It's not replacement theology, therefore it's right theology. And the problem with this is whenever we divide the world like this, we can run into problems. And this is where I started some years ago. But recently, the Lord has been working on me about this whole idea. And so maybe this issue is not quite so simple. And that's where we're headed in this presentation. To start this thought going forward, I want to tell you a story about myself. When I was a kid, my mom had a rule that once we had dessert, usually soon after dinner, that after brushing our teeth, we could have no more dessert. But my mom had this thing where she had one caveat. She said, okay, if you're still hungry before going to bed, you can't have dessert, but you can have an apple. Now, the thing about me was I had such a sweet tooth. I love desserts. And I had such a sweet tooth that the apple really wasn't sweet enough for me. And so I found that I could skirt around the rules by putting something else on the apple to flavor it a little bit. And my secret go around the end around strategy was to salt it, which actually made it taste a bit sweeter. Now, why do I tell this story? Because I want to talk about original sin. And we've all known and come to this idea that original sin is based on pride. And this has been taught by major theologians for years. I accept it, okay? But I think that original sin has a certain flavor with it, that it is flavored with a bit of replacement. So let's take a look at this and see if we might be able to discover together how original sin is flavored with replacement. And one of the main things I want to point out right up front here is it's not easy being number two. And because this story is about Adam and Eve, and because Eve in this particular example has Eve, and Eve is a woman, the first woman. I just want to make this very, very clear. This story is not about Eve. It's about how it's not easy to be number two. Okay, that's the way in which you should think about this. Okay. So let's look at Genesis 2. The Lord commanded the man, saying, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. Then the Lord God said, it's not good for man to be alone. So, what can we learn from these set of verses? What we can learn is that Adam got the command from God, and before Eve was formed. Right? Very clear. Adam got the command. Eve was not yet formed from his rib. Okay. So let's continue reading, and let's jump down to verse 3. And I'm providing just the bare number of verses it takes to get the point I'm trying to reach. Genesis 3 in verse 1, and he, the serpent, said to the woman, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. But from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. Okay, so what's changed? Compare the command as it was given to Adam and the command as it was relayed to the serpent from Eve. And of course, you will notice that the extra phrase, or touch it, is added into the command as it was relayed by Eve to the serpent. So we can infer from this, where did Eve learn of this command? She learned it from Adam. So we can see in this sequence here that Adam, as being the first human, Eve was the second, but God had chosen to give the original command to Adam. He could have waited until Eve came along, but he didn't. He gave the original command to Adam. And we can see from this dynamic between what God told Adam and what Eve told the serpent is that this gave Adam a certain level of positional authority over Eve. We don't know exactly how he conveyed it to her. And that's a whole another topic, which is not really the point here. But the main point is we can see that Eve was working underneath a certain positional authority over Adam because he was first. He knew more. Okay. All right. Now, let's continue reading the story. So let's continue with verses 4 and 5. The serpent said to the woman, "You surely will not die." Of course, that being a lie. "For God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So here we see the great temptation for Eve, for mankind in general, that of pride, of being like God. So what did this look like in Eve's mind in terms of this pride? I would just suggest a simple little diagram like this. We have God as essentially infinite, filling up the whole screen here. And Eve knew that she wasn't going to be subsuming everything that God was, but she could just be somehow like him. She could have there would be certain things that she would understand and know and perhaps be able to do that were more than before. The attributes of God she would have. And she also knew that that she wouldn't be alone in that Adam would also have these abilities as well. Okay, so there's the pride. Now let's continue. Let's read verse 6. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate, and she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. Whether her husband is right next to her or a mile away, it doesn't matter. It's still, she took from its fruit and ate, and then she gave to her husband secondly. So there's a question here that I'd like to ask. What would Eve have gained with respect to Adam? In other words, if she ate and got what she was expecting to get, what would she have gained with respect to Adam? Take a second and think about it. Okay. What she would have gained with respect to Adam is being number one. In other words, Eve would have been the first one in to this heightened state of living, this heightened state of being, even after she gave it to Adam and he ate second. And she would always retain this honor of being the first one in. And she would also always be known as the one who brought about this new kind of life together. Okay. So we have Adam, it's the number one human, first human. Eve was the second human. I propose to you that the temptation for replacement is always very strong for the number two. Again, not talking about women, talking about any number two. Let's take an example that's associated with our conference now, leaving Adam and Eve. We have from Scripture that salvation is from the Jews. Here first. And we have from Scripture Christians have been grafted in. They're second. And I would propose to you that the temptation for evil action is also very strong for every number two. And I think we have 2,000 years of terrible Christian history to prove it. Think about what Christians have done to Jews, the killing and everything else that we've done from this position. So evil action is a strong temptation for a number two. And we have from Paul to Christians in Romans chapter 11, verse 18, he says, don't be arrogant towards them. Very clear command to us not to be arrogant towards the Jews. So let's take this personally. Let's take this upon ourselves and ask ourselves, have you ever looked at someone and thought, I could do their job. I'm better than they are at that. Could be a boss, could be a coworker. You see, I say that the temptation for replacement is subtle, but it's strong for those of us that are under a certain positional authority and among siblings. Have we ever thought, if we're in a family of siblings, have we ever thought we want dad to love us most, right? So there's a temptation there, right? We may not act on it, but there's a temptation. So when we think about this idea of replacement, I'm going to propose that our biggest challenge regarding the Jews is not, do we believe the Abrahamic covenant is still in force, but that our biggest challenge regarding the Jews is, in what way might we wish to replace the Jewish position of chosenness? Okay. And perhaps there's another way to say it, sort of a second idea to get this across is, our biggest challenge regarding Jews might be, in what way might we covet the Jewish blessing? Give you an example. The Jews are less than 1% of world population, well under 1%. And yet Jews comprise, I've heard, up to 40% of the top 100 wealthiest people in the world. Okay, so there's a Jewish blessing going on. But I still admit that these questions I'm asking right now are fairly abstract. So I'm going to try one more time. Let's look at the New Testament and this scripture. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. This is true. It's also true, Romans 11:11. By their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles, to you and me. And finally, we have in Romans 11:26, all Israel will be saved. And as we look at all of these things and figure out how all of this is true all at the same time, the question is this: does the fact that we have accepted Jesus into our hearts before them give us positional authority over them now? Or we can ask it in an even simpler way. Are we God's new number one until they get saved? I don't have easy answers to this. I'm just raising the questions. But what I do know is this: Paul commands that we must not be arrogant. Therefore, we must not be arrogant at all. We must not be infinitesimally more arrogant than if we did not have Christ living within us. Let me bring this presentation towards the finish line here. I believe that in God's view, the idea of establishing a positional order or relationship, that it has nothing to do with equality or inequality. It has nothing to do with worth, value, destiny. It has to do with role. And we know that God exalts the humble. The best example of that in the entire universe is the Father and his Son Jesus, who lowered himself lowered himself to come to earth and take on human form. We know God exalts the humble. And indeed, as Philippians 2 says, therefore God highly exalted him, Christ, and bestowed on him the name that is above every name. So, why stand with Israel? Because it means coming into alignment with yet another aspect of God's unexpected and upside down plan for world redemption. The number two needs to humble himself and trust God's plan. The number two needs to be confident in God's love for him. And the number two must not covet number one's role or position for himself. The history of number one and number two across time is not very good. You can see all of these examples here, which ended poorly. So, why stand with Israel? Maybe we have the chance to get this number one and number two thing right for a change. Huh? And who got it right in the past? Well, got two great examples. First is Jonathan and David. Jonathan was the eldest son of King Saul, recognized the authority of David, the youngest son of Jesse, and they were great friends. And John the Baptist, who prepared the way for his younger cousin Jesus. So, why stand with Israel? It's one of the ways that we can prepare the way for Jesus to come again. As the Son of God, of course, but not just that, also as the King of the Jews. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes my presentation.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. We are going to now have some questions, so if you will just hold tight, we will get those prepared, and we'll take those. So just 1 minute, and we'll be right back with you. Thanks so much, Bob.
Sure.
While we're waiting for those, I really appreciated what you had to say about the number one and number two positions. I thought that was very insightful. I've never thought of Eve as wanting to be in that number one spot, but you make a very good case for that, and that helps us to understand replacement theology really in a new light. That God has this special purpose, and the number twos aren't so happy about it. Okay, so
Yes.
here are some questions.
And can you see my face okay?
1 second. We have a delay, so yeah, we sure can. All right, so let me go ahead with the question. All right. Do you really think Eve wanted to be number one? Or did she she wanted to, what was told she couldn't have? Did she just want what she was told she couldn't have?
I've thought about this a lot, and I don't claim to have a full answer. I think it's a very fair question. I do think that because of the state of the world then, it was in a good state. And I think Eve probably had this idea of how life could be better for both of them. But the key point that I would make here is she deliberately chose to take that fruit and eat it herself first, and then share it with Adam. And she didn't know what the result was going to be, but she ate it first. And so that is the clue that we have, that there was a flavor of replacement in what she did. It was not, certainly was not the main thing going on.
Awesome. So what next question. I saw on YouTube during the blood moon, Jews were not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. How was this perceived in Israel? How come we never saw this in the news?
What a great question. It's been this way since 1967, when Moshe Dayan gave away, after having conquered the Temple Mount, gave the rights away over to Jordan to control the administration of the Temple Mount. And over time, because of the tensions, the Arabs have expressed their great frustration and anger over Jews praying on the Temple Mount. And then similarly, the Israeli government has sought to appease the Arabs by requiring that their people do not go up and pray. I went up to the Temple Mount with Gedon a couple of years ago. We walked up together, and a Israeli guard, Israeli soldier with his gun, was essentially pointing it at Gedon's feet, telling him, "Don't move your lips." I mean, you couldn't even just like whisper anything. If they saw your lips moving, which is the way Jews pray, they don't pray silently. They have to make a little bit of sound at least. They're ordered to stop and ordered off the Temple Mount. And so basically, we were sent off the Temple Mount in about 2 minutes, not because of what Gedon did, but just the whole group in that particular case. How do they feel about it? It hurts. It really, really hurts. They would just love to be able to go up there and pray. They could get a little bit closer to the Holy of Holies if they could get up on there and pray instead of just praying at the Western Wall. They could get a little bit closer to the Holy of Holies if they could get up on there and pray instead of just praying at the Western Wall.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your presentations. Thank you for enlightening us about a possible reason for the whole idea of replacement theology. I think it's so important that we understand that God loves Israel. That love is never going to go away. God has a special purpose. And the cool thing is that he wants everybody to be included. It's not just that, you know, God has this thing for the Jews and that's it. He doesn't care about anybody else. He cares about everybody. The whole world is what he cares about. But he's bringing this about in a particular way that will be all-inclusive, but it does not, by any means, exclude the Jews. It does not replace the Jews. They are very much front and center in this whole thing. So thank you so much for all the work that you and Gedon are doing. We appreciate that. And thank you for coming here and sharing with us, giving your time to help us understand better how we can stand with Israel.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.